How to mix green watercolour. In today's video I'm going to show you how to take your brightest ready-made greens and mix a whole range of really interesting new colours from them. Welcome back to my channel. If we haven't met before, my name is Michelle and on this channel you'll find all things watercolour, a little bit of mixed media too, so please do consider subscribing. If you click the bell notification, you'll get notified every time I have a new video for you, and I make one free video a week here on YouTube on a Thursday with extra content on a Saturday for my Patreon subscribers. Now, I've been teaching watercolour painting to beginners for many years now, and one thing they always get into trouble with is greens, and it's not really their fault because firstly they have very little knowledge being new to the medium of colour mixing, and secondly the greens that you get in beginner sets tend to be very limited, and there tends to be always one dark green that's really bright. Sometimes it's called Viridian, sometimes it's called emerald, sometimes it's called Phthalo Green. All of these are slightly connected. I'm going to show you how in a minute. But if you just keep putting that green into everything, you're going to end up with landscapes, particularly if you live somewhere with a more temperate climate like I do here in England, Europe, North America. You're going to find that these greens just aren't right for your location. However, they are hugely adjustable. They're beautiful colours and they're very adjustable. So in today's video, I'm going to show you 8 different recipes, as it were, for making new colours, new greens, and also other colours from these this base colour of green, so that you can just make that colour go a little bit further and make it a little bit more useful. Now you could, in theory, you could put any colour that you own into a green and make something new, but I've just picked some that I think are going to be the most useful colours for you when you're starting out. So what I'm going to do now is point the camera downwards and just talk a little bit about what these greens, these bright greens, are and how they work. So let's look at some of these bright greens. Now, when I first started teaching painting, I didn't know anything about pigments. I was just looking at colours, and I used to see my students using something called Viridian, this very bright blue-based green. And I used to actually say, I'd go out and do demonstrations at art clubs and things, say, well, I don't like Viridian green, it's very unnatural. But I didn't realise that probably what I was looking at most of the time in these student sets wasn't actually Viridian green, it wasn't correctly labelled. So I've got a Viridian here, which is proper Viridian green, and this is PG18, that's the pigment number. So this is actual Viridian green, and I'm going to swatch a bit of that for you so you can see it. And actually it's not that crazy bright, and it's rather granulating. So there's your true Viridian green. Now what happens in student sets is often things are replaced with cheaper pigments. And I think a lot of the time what I was looking at was actually Phthalo Green. Now another thing that you find is emerald green. Now I've got 2 emerald greens here. Now emerald is just a name, it could mean anything at all. So I've got this emerald green here, which is White Knights St. Petersburg. So let's have a look at this one. Now this one is actually PG7, so this is actually Phthalo Green. Now, to complicate matters further, there is not just one Phthalo Green pigment. I'm just going to talk today about the most common one, but there are other forms of Phthalo Green. But we're looking today at this one here, which is PG7. I've got another version of Emerald Green here by Jackman's, and this one is actually a mixture. So it has got that PG7 in, and it's also got, I'm looking on the back now, I think it's PY98, which I think is more of a yellowish pigment. I do not know all of the pigments off by heart. So you can see there, it's still very bright, but it's more yellow. And then I've got another one by Jackman's. The only reason it's in a small pot is because they sometimes very kindly send me samples. This is a sample pot. Actually, I'm just going to take a little bit out of the lid. And again, this is the Phthalo Green. Now let's talk about the word hue. Sometimes in beginner sets what you'll get is Viridian green hue. Now I knew that the word hue meant colour, that's all it means, the word hue means colour. So I assumed that Viridian green hue was Viridian green, but when it's talked about in that way, what it usually means is the hue stands for it's a copy of the colour. So when it says Viridian green hue, what it means is this is a colour that looks like Viridian. So often with the word hue, you again are not getting a standard colour. So the actual true Viridian here, and this is Talon's Rembrandt, and they will all vary. Even if using the same pigments, they'll vary between brands. And then I've got these two here, which are Phthalo Green, and then I've got this one here, which is a mix, an emerald, a mix of a Phthalo Green and a more yellowish pigment. So today what I'm going to use is the Phthalo Green, but really this applies to all of these bright blue-based greens. If you need to adjust any of them, you can use the recipes that I'm going to give you today. So before we get on to the actual recipes, I'm just going to talk really briefly about how I would analyse a colour and consider what other colours might go into it well, because if I explain my thinking, then as you move forward, you will find it easier to analyse other colours that you own and consider what you might add to them. So let's look at where our lovely bright green sits in relation to the other colours in the spectrum. Now I've written the primary colours along here, so you've got blue and yellow and red, and we know that if we mix blue and yellow together we get green. So green is a secondary colour. Now there is a caveat to that. Green is only a secondary colour as considered by some people and as considered by artists. As artists, if we want to make green, we have to mix blue and yellow. So for the purposes of mixing paint, it is convenient to consider that green is a secondary colour. But if you asked a scientist, somebody that was dealing in refracted light, they might have a different opinion. They might tell you that green is a primary. So neither is right nor wrong. It's just the way that it's easier as an artist to mix your colours. So you've got your three primary colours here. You've got your blue and yellow making green. So as an artist, we can't extract the yellow and the blue out of these separately. And of course, it's not even a two pigment colour, it's a single pigment colour, which is how you know there's something a little strange about green regarding whether it's a primary or a secondary colour. So I can't get the yellow out of this and I can't get the blue out of this. You know, even with a laboratory, I would struggle. So we can't make another yellow or another blue from this colour. We can only make other greens. So what could we do? We could add different and more yellows to it to change the yellow balance, and we could add different and more blue to it to change the blue balance, change into, in fact, a different kind of green. We could always add red to it. Now red is the third primary, and by red I also include pink. Now if we add pink or red to it, then we tend to neutralize it, because if you mix all three primary colours together, what you get is a neutral. I can never spell neutral. I always mix the, I think that's right, I always mix the E and the U up. I don't know why. So we would get a neutral colour. Now by neutral I mean basically brown or grey. What decides whether we get brown or grey is basically down to the balance of the cool primary, which is blue. If our mix of all three primaries has a lot of blue in, it'll be a grey. If it has more yellow and more red in, it'll be a brown. So as well as adding more blue or more yellow to change it to a different type of green, or adding more red to neutralise it, we could also go the full hog and put a neutral into it. We could also use one of the other secondary colours. These would be blue and red makes purple, and red and yellow makes orange. Now because orange and purple also contain red, it would be similar to putting a neutral in. So looking at it logically, what can we make from this green? We can make other greens, or we can push that green more towards neutral. We can also lighten or darken this colour depending on the pigment we add, and some of that will be depending on how much water we add. So the first colour we're going to add to our green is Cadmium Yellow Light, and of all the colours that I'm using today, it's probably the only one more or less that's going to make your green even brighter. So as we swatch these colours, just a reminder that Phthalo Green, which is the one I'm swatching from here today, but you could equally be using your Emerald or Viridian. Phthalo Green is a staining colour, which means it's very strong. So I don't want you to think that you can sort of dump a ton of this in your palette and then put a little bit of something else in, you're going to get much of an adjustment, because you won't. It's very strong. So in most cases, this is the colour that I'm going to add second. So let's have a look at the first colour. So this is one of my favourite colours. This is Talon's Rembrandt Cadmium Yellow Light. You can see I've almost finished with it. Now on my palette, it's kind of the next one up for me from Lemon. So if I show you my palette, there is a bit of muck and green here, but you can get an idea of how they sit on my palette. You can see I've got the yellows going from cool to warm. This first one is some SAA Primrose Yellow. It's got lots and lots of muck in it at the moment. And this one here would be my Lemon. Now, the next one up, you can see how it's a little bit sunnier. This is the Cadmium Yellow Light. You get all sorts of cadmium yellows. Another similar colour is Cerulean. And this is kind of your sunshine yellow. So if you don't need that kind of acid yellow, you want to go up to a sunny yellow, this is a really, really useful colour to have in your palette. So I'm going to swatch a little bit of it. I won't swatch out of here for any colours that are mucky, that need cleaning up, because I want to make sure that we get a pure colour. So I'm going to put a little bit of this colour down so you can see what it looks like, and then we're going to add it to our Phthalo Green. What I want to do is to make a much lighter, brighter, more yellow green. So let's swatch our cadmium yellow on its own first of all. Look at that beautiful colour. Slightly opaque, as all cadmiums are, but I really don't have a problem with that. It's got a lot of punch to it, this colour. So what I'm going to do now, clean my brush and then put some of the Jackman's Phthalo Green in. If you would like a discount off any Jackman's paints, I have a 10% discount code in the description of this video. I'll also list any other brands that I use there with links to those as well, so you can have a look at those if you want to pick up any of these colours yourself. So put a little bit of that in there and then just stir it in to my yellow. And you can take it, you know, you can see within each of these mixes you could add more or less of each proportion, but you don't really need very much blue or green at all to turn yellow, to tip it over into green. So I'm not going to add too much there. I can always add more. You can't take the paint out once it's mixed in like that. So there we are. I'm going to get now a lovely bright yellow green, and I think this is probably much more useful as a landscape and flower painting colour, particularly for those fresh buds on flowers. I think, you know, this is a much more useful colour already than it as it exists on its own as a phthalo green. Next, we're going to add a much duller yellow. It's a yellow that's sometimes considered to be an earth colour, which is yellow ochre. So let's look at yellow ochre now. Now, yellow ochre is a very murky colour. It's very opaque, somewhat granular, and it's technically considered to sit in the earths rather than the yellows. I keep it with the yellows on my palette because it is so overwhelmingly yellow that it's really the easiest place to keep it in terms of colour mixing. So there's my yellow ochre. This one again is Talon's Rembrandt. I do have the one from Jackman's as well. That one's a little bit brighter actually than this one, which is a little bit duller. But as a colour group, they are all somewhat dull and granular, and so they mix very natural neutral greens. So of course it occurs to me, if I want to make the green that I'm mixing a bit duller, then to put some yellow ochre in would be the ideal thing, surely. So let's mix this and see what we get with our Phthalo Green. It's quite clean in my palette here, so I'm going to use this one from my palette and just mix like so. Clean my brush. Always clean your brush before going between paint colours, especially if you're using paint that's wet like this, because you're pushing dirty pigment right inside, which is why I tend to keep mine dried like this, because when they do get mucky you can just give them a scrub and get the paint off the top. So let's mix some of that in, and as suspected, I think I'm going to go a little bit dark with this one, but as suspected I'm getting a real natural looking green. It freshens up a little bit if I put more of the phthalo in. I actually liked the first incarnation of it. She was a bit more limey, but not a bright lime. Of course, if you wanted a bright lime, you could mix one of the more clear yellows in, one of the sort of the golden yellows or the cadmium yellow deep. So here we are. Look at that, a really, really lovely natural green we're getting there. And of course, because it comes from yellow ochre, it's got that granulation in it. So there's our phthalo green when mixed with yellow ochre. Next, we're going to add a transparent colour, a really interesting colour, which is Quinacridone Gold. So this is a Daniel Smith colour, and this is Quinacridone Gold. Now, although this palette here looks dirty, it has been scrubbed. We have, in this part of England, we have incredibly hard water, which basically means we have a lot of lime in it. So we have lime scale everywhere. It gets all over our taps, makes everything white and disgusting. and so the paint pigment there is actually stuck to the lime scale. The way to get it off is to soak it in white vinegar, so I will do that sometime. So what I'm saying is that it's not going to pollute the colours that I'm mixing. It's pretty much permanently on there at the moment. Now see that clear stuff that's come out there? That's just a bit of the binder that made the paint, because I haven't used this one for a while, so I'm just going to wipe that away so that it's not too smeary, but it won't do any harm. There's nothing wrong if that happens. So here's my Quinacridone Gold. Now when it's in the palette, and this is Quinacridone Gold is a good way of telling that you should make colour swatches, because when it's in the palette it looks dark brown, but you can see it's less yellow than something like Indian yellow or transparent yellow. It's more to the gold side, so going towards brown, but it's a beautiful bright transparent colour. Look at that, it's a lovely, lovely colour. So what I'm hoping when we mix this with our Phthalo Green is that we'll get something along the lines of Daniel Smith's sort of green gold. Possibly not, because the Phthalo Green may be a little bit too blue for that to happen, but I'm just going to put some in and see what we get. So already looking nice and fresh, and you're getting this sort of lime colour to it. So I think I'll have it a little bit lighter just so we can get a good impression. It actually is looking a lot like the Daniel Smith green gold. And of course sometimes you can accidentally make another paint pigment exactly as it is without looking at the pigments on the side of the tube. I wouldn't be able to tell you what it's made of, but goodness, that's very close. Daniel Smith green gold. Look at that, really beautiful, fairly bright but still very, very natural. So moving away from the yellows, we're going to add some blue now. So I'm going to choose Ultramarine, which is a very granular sort of purple leaning blue. At this point, if you're getting some value from this video, could I just ask you to do me a favour and click the like button, please? YouTube rewards interaction. My channel's just past 10k subscribers at this point, so I'd be really, really grateful if you could like, comment, share or subscribe. It helps my channel to grow, and I'm really grateful because then I can teach more people to paint. So the Ultramarine I've got here is this one, Talon's Rembrandt Ultramarine Deep. Now the reason I thought immediately of adding Ultramarine is because Ultramarine has already got a touch of red in it. It tends towards the red purplish end of the spectrum, so it always makes fairly dull green. So it occurs to me that if I add this to our bright green, what we should have is a slightly bluer, slightly duller, darker green. So let's see what happens, but I'll swatch it firstly. There's various types of ultramarine. One of the more well-known ones is French ultramarine, and that just has a little bit more of the red in it, so it's a little bit more purplish. And here's our Ultramarine Deep, really beautiful purple leaning blue. So although this is a dark blue, I'm going to start with the blue because it's not as strong, it's not a staining colour, so it's not as strong as the phthalo. So I'm going to start with the blue and then just put a tiny bit of the phthalo in. Look at that, what a beautiful colour. I think we'll go, I mean, you could leave it there and have this kind of bright, slightly turquoisey, tealy colour, but I'm going to go a little bit further with the green so that it still looks like a green. So I think we'll stop there. Look at that, that's somewhat unexpected actually. But of course you can adjust this colour further. I've got an SAA colour, a mixed colour that's called Ocean Blue, and really looks like that. What a beautiful colour. Not as dull as I was expecting actually, but of course that will vary from brand to brand. This is quite a bright ultramarine, some of them are much duller, so the colours you get will be slightly different to mine if you've got different brands, but I really love that. Look at that. It's a beautiful, beautiful sort of teal blue-green. Next up, another blue, and just because it's one of my all-time favourites, let's use Cerulean Blue. Now Cerulean Blue is one of my all-time favourite colours. This one here is Daniel Smith, but I also own the Talons one, and I think actually the Talons one is my favourite Cerulean. If you've got a beginner set of paints, often the Cerulean is not very good. So if you want to just upgrade, you know, there are one or two colours that really do benefit sometimes from being upgraded, and Cerulean is one of them. So let's just swatch that. Cerulean is a beautiful light sort of sky blue, and it granulates heavily, but it's also very delicate, so it never looks too much, as ultramarine can sometimes do with its granulation. It can look very heavy. Cerulean always looks delicate, so this is my Cerulean Blue. Now Cerulean is a very weak colour compared to the phthalo, so I'm only going to put the tiniest touch of green in to start with, just to see what we get. And I'm expecting something similar to the result that we got with the Ultramarine, but much lighter and more delicate. So already that's pushing a long way into the green, but actually I still think it's very pretty. So let's swatch that one. So you've got almost another version of the one that we got with Ultramarine, but this one really is much brighter and prettier and more delicate looking. So this one is more towards, you know, you could push it a bit more towards aqua, whereas the other one more looks like it goes towards teal. Of course you could do this much lighter or much darker, just depending how much paint and how much water you put in. Let's go for a colour opposite this time, and we're going into a pink. So I'm going to use Quinacridone Pink. So this is a Talens Rembrandt colour, and this is my standard sort of blue based pink that I keep in my palette. It's a really, really important colour for mixing from. If you don't have a pink like this, you really are missing out. I'm going to put a link above to a previous video I did all about the necessity of having a pink like this for mixing in your palette. Now, you don't have to have this Quinacridone one. I've got Quinacridone Rose here. You might have Permanent Rose in your palette, or perhaps Opera Pink. You could even use something like a magenta. The reason I've chosen a pink rather than a red is the red is going to have a lot more yellow in it. It's going to be to that yellow-orange end of the spectrum. And so I'm going to end up with sort of murky browns rather than a grey, which is what more of what I'm going for here. So I'm going to squeeze some of this colour out, and I'll swatch it for you. It's a lovely, lovely bright pink, so useful for flower painting and lots of other things. As I said, if you want to know more about mixing from a pink like this, do have a look at that other video. So let's swatch this. Now, for the purposes of colour mixing, you can consider all your pinks and your crimsons to be reds, but just from the cool end of the spectrum. So I've got quite a lot on there, so I'm probably going to move some over here and put some water with it, and then we'll start adding our green. And these are opposite colours because the green contains the yellow and blue pigment, and then you've got the pink that is the opposite colour. And when I talk about the green containing yellow and blue pigment, before anyone picks me up on it, yes, I know it's a single pigment colour, but it's that that thing we talked about at the beginning, where if I wanted to mix a green, I'd be mixing from those colours. So what we're doing here is we're adding its colour opposite, and you can see how it neutralises. Now at this stage it's only neutralised it a little bit, and so I've actually got a kind of a nice dull purple colour, so I could do that. I'm going to push it a little bit further actually. I'm not going to go too far into the grey because we're going to do that later on. So look at this, we've now got a sort of a colour that's between grey and purple. I could push it further, as I said, I would get grey if I kept going, but just for fun, so that we get a unique set of colours today, let's stop before it goes fully into grey. Got this nice sort of cool, stormy, lilac-y purple. And moving away from primary colours now, we're going to use an earth colour. We're going to use Burnt Sienna. So I've got Jackman's Art Materials Burnt Sienna. I'm using this one because it's actually a little bit brighter than my Talens Rembrandt version of Burnt Sienna. But all Burnt Siennas are kind of a very warm reddish brown. So if I show you, squeeze a little bit of this one out earlier, I'll swatch a bit for you. Now they don't go as far into red as things like Venetian red and red oxide. They're a brilliant colour for things like terracotta. So another really useful colour to have in your palette, and I think it's going to make something really interesting if we mix a little bit of our Phthalo Green into it. So just mixing these together here, and I'm still getting a green, but it's a much more earthy brownish green. What a beautiful colour painting things in the autumn or fall, as you would say if you're watching from America. Right, so let's swatch this one. Look at that, what a gorgeous colour. Now if I kept adding the Burnt Sienna, I would go much more neutral with it, but I actually like just where I've stopped it here. It's kind of like a dull moss colour, but it's actually, because this is such a nice Burnt Sienna, it's actually still got I can't even call it a brightness, but it's got a glow to it. So it's a really, really lovely neutral mossy green. Another neutral now, we're going to go into a grey, a really dark blue based grey, and that's Paynes grey. So just as I'm showing you this this next colour, if you are interested in learning more from me and having a full online course, I do have some courses now on a site called Thinkific. You'll find the link in the description of this video. I've got a mixed media and watercolour course at the moment. I'm also going to be having, I haven't built it yet, but I'm going to be doing a really basic watercolor techniques course. So what you can do is, if you click the link, if you register with the site, you don't have to buy anything, but if you like the idea of doing a course with me, but I haven't got the course that you want yet, if you register with the site, that means I have your email, and not only do I have your email, but I know that you are someone that's specifically interested on online courses, and then I'll be able to send you a little email once I have that next course built. Of course, if you're watching this video in 6 months' time, hopefully I've already done the work. Right, so we've got Paynes Grey now. This is another incredibly useful colour. I've got another video on this one. I'll link to that one up above as well. It's a great colour for mixing. It's a blue-based grey. If nothing else, swap it out for your black, because black isn't that useful, especially if you're just starting out. But this is a really useful colour. So let me swatch it for you. I'm trying not to go too dark with it, because it really can be incredibly, I wouldn't say black, but incredibly dark. It's a much cleaner looking colour than black, and sort of conversely, it's got less brown in than black. Okay, so there's my Paynes Grey. So what I'm looking for this time, and because this is a blue-based colour, I know this is going to mix really well with my my blue-based green here. And what I'm looking for now is a real sort of grey-green. Now, although I told you not to start with the green, it doesn't make too much difference with this colour, because they're both staining colours and they're both really strong. So you're just going to have to be a little bit restrained, because if you dump a ton of Paynes Grey in, you're going to find that you just cover up the green, and almost vice versa. So there we are. Look at that. This is what I'm looking for, this real sort of grey-green. I mean, I could go a little bit further. Let's put a tiny bit more of the Paynes Grey in. I don't want to go too far with it. I don't want to completely lose the green shade to it. So let's swatch that one. Look at that, really, really beautiful colour. Once I swatched it, actually, it looks more blue than green, but it's a much more teal type colour. Look at that, such a beautiful and interesting colour. So look at all these amazing colours we've mixed just from that first colour. So we've got yellow ochre, made us this very, very soft neutral yellow green. Then we've got Paynes Grey, made this fabulous kind of teal blue grey. And then we've got Ultramarine, made almost a turquoise colour. Burnt Sienna made a lovely, really unusual brown green. Quinacridone Gold gave us a golden green. Quinacridone Pink gave us a sort of muted lilac-y colour. And then Cadmium Yellow Light gave us this incredibly bright yellow green. And Cerulean Blue gave us a beautiful aqua. Do let me know in the comments which of these colour mixes you enjoyed the most, and of course share your own recipes with me too. A special thank you to those of you who support this channel on Patreon. If you enjoyed this video, you're going to enjoy the most recent one I made before this, which was all about 10 basic recipes for really interesting greens. You can watch that video right now.